He visited an ancient ship every week, until one day she reactivated him with a shocking message. Daniel had always been curious about old things. He loved history and stories, especially those that had been forgotten over time. Every weekend, he found himself walking along the quiet harbor near his town, where fishermen mended their nets and gulls circled overhead. One Saturday morning, as the sun rose over the water and painted the harbor with shades of gold and pink, Daniel noticed something he had never seen before: an old ship docked at the far end of the pier. It was unlike any ship he had seen. Its hull was rusty, and the paint had long faded, leaving a mixture of gray and brown streaks across the metal. The wood on the deck was cracked and worn, and some of the ropes hung loosely, fraying at the ends. Yet despite its age and the air of abandonment, there was something striking about it. It looked majestic in its decay, like a monument to an era that no one remembered. Daniel felt a shiver of excitement. He didn't know why, but he knew he had to explore it. The first time he approached, the dock creaked under his feet. He stopped at the edge, studying the ship carefully. Its name, barely visible on the bow, seemed to have been worn away by years of wind and water. He imagined the stories it could tell, the people who had sailed on it, the places it had traveled, the storms it had survived. Most people in the town avoided the ship. Some said it was haunted. Children whispered that they had seen strange lights flicker in its windows at night. But Daniel didn't feel fear. He felt curiosity, a deep, almost magnetic pull toward the old vessel. Over the next few weeks, Daniel returned to the harbor. Every Saturday, he would bring a notebook, a camera, and sometimes a small backpack with snacks. He started by simply walking around the ship, touching the railings, examining the deck, and peeking into windows where light barely entered. The smell of salt and old wood filled his senses. There were faded ropes coiled neatly in corners, broken benches, and rusted lanterns hanging from the masts. Each object seemed to tell a story. He wrote down everything he noticed, even small details like the way the sun reflected off the water onto the ship's hull or how the creaking sound of the boards changed with the tide. One day, Daniel climbed the small ladder to the deck. He was careful, testing each step before putting his weight down. When he reached the top, he looked around and felt a strange sense of calm. The harbor seemed farther away here, as if the ship itself created a small world that existed separately. From this height, he could see the town behind him, the mountains in the distance, and the endless blue water stretching to the horizon. But the ship commanded all his attention. He walked slowly, touching the worn wood and imagining what it must have felt like when sailors had stood there, facing storms and waves. He found a small door leading to what looked like the captain's cabin. The door was heavy, and its hinges groaned as he opened it. Inside, dust covered every surface, and the sunlight coming through a small round window illuminated floating particles in the air. There was a desk, with papers yellowed by age, a chair that leaned slightly to one side, and shelves with old books and maps. Daniel felt like he had stepped back in time. He gently picked up one of the maps. The paper was fragile and the ink had faded, but he could still make out routes and markings. He wondered who had used this map and where they had sailed. As he explored, he noticed something strange. At the back of the cabin, behind a small panel that looked like part of the wall, there were buttons and switches that didn't seem to belong to the ship's age. They were modern, sleek, and metallic, with labels in a language he didn't recognize. Some of the buttons had small lights beside them, but none were lit. Daniel pressed one gently, almost afraid of what might happen, but nothing did. He stepped back, puzzled. How could a ship this old have equipment that looked so new? He made a note in his notebook. Find out what this is. Investigate more next week. Every visit brought something new. He found old journals, diaries of crew members who had sailed decades ago. Some entries described ordinary things, like meals and chores, but others hinted at unusual events. Storms that appeared out of nowhere, strange lights at sea, and nights when the crew swore they felt the ship move on its own. Daniel read them carefully, feeling a mix of excitement and wonder. He began to feel connected to the people who had sailed this ship long before him. It was as if the stories had waited for someone to listen. The townspeople noticed Daniel's visits. Some laughed and said he was wasting his time on a useless, broken ship. Others whispered that he was brave or foolish. But Daniel didn't mind. He had found a place where he felt alive, a place where the past seemed close enough to touch. He even started bringing small tools and materials to fix minor things. a broken railing here, a loose plank there. It wasn't much, but it made him feel like he was helping the ship, giving it the care it hadn't had for decades. One rainy Saturday, he arrived to find the harbor nearly empty. Dark clouds hung low, and the wind made the water ripple and crash against the dock. He hurried to the ship, ignoring the rain, and climbed aboard. The deck was slippery, and he held onto the railings as he explored. When he reached the control room, he noticed that one of the panels, the same one with the buttons he had seen before, was slightly warmer than the others. He touched it lightly, and for a brief moment, a faint hum filled the room. He stepped back, startled, and waited. The hum faded. He wrote in his notebook, "Something is in this ship, something alive." Daniel's fascination grew stronger. Every Saturday, he tried to understand the ship a little more. He sketched diagrams of the deck layout, photographed unusual objects, and even measured parts of the ship to compare with the old plans he found in the town library. Slowly, he began to notice patterns: the way the ship's engines had been arranged, the placement of the living quarters, the strange technology hidden in plain sight. He couldn't explain it, but he felt as if the ship was waiting for him to discover something important. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with orange and purple, Daniel sat on the deck, notebook in hand, watching the water shimmer. The wind carried the smell of salt and rain, and for a moment he felt as if the ship was breathing, alive in a quiet, patient way. He smiled to himself, realizing that this ship had become more than just an old vessel. It was a mystery, a friend, and a challenge all at once, and he was determined to understand it piece by piece. By the end of the first month, Daniel had a routine. Saturday mornings were for discovery. Saturday afternoons were for recording observations and researching in the library. He shared little of what he found with anyone else, keeping it mostly to himself. He wanted to experience the ship without interruption, to let it reveal its secrets naturally. The more he explored, the more he felt a bond forming, quiet, unspoken, but real. Sometimes at night, he would dream of the ship moving through foggy waters, lights flickering on its deck, and shadows moving inside cabins long abandoned. He would wake up with the feeling that the ship had a story to tell, waiting for him to be ready. And every Saturday, as he walked toward the harbor, he felt that same thrill, the sense that something extraordinary was hidden within the rusted hull, and that he had been chosen in some way to uncover it. Weeks passed, and Daniel's life began to revolve around the ship. Friends and neighbors noticed, but he didn't mind their concern. He knew that this ship was special, that it held mysteries the world had forgotten. And in his heart, he believed that if he remained patient and observant, the ship would eventually reveal its story. It was on one quiet morning, with the mist hanging low over the water, that Daniel first heard a faint noise, a soft click like a lock opening coming from the control panel. His heart raced. He stepped closer, feeling the wooden floor beneath his feet creak, and touched the panel gently. Nothing happened at first, but then, just for a second, he thought he saw a small light flicker on one of the buttons. He stepped back, amazed and slightly afraid. The ship, it seemed, had noticed him. From that day on, his visits became more than just curiosity. They became a quest. Daniel didn't know what he was looking for, but he knew he would recognize it when he found it. The old ship, forgotten by the world, had become the center of his life, a place of wonder, history, and perhaps something even more extraordinary. And so, Daniel continued to visit the ship every week, climbing its decks, exploring its cabins, and documenting every detail. The harbor watched silently, the gulls circled overhead, and the old ship waited patiently, its secrets hidden beneath rust, wood, and years of silence. Little did Daniel know, the moment was approaching when the ship would respond in a way he could never imagine. Every Saturday, Daniel woke up with the same excitement he had felt the very first time he saw the old ship. Over time, his visits had become more than a hobby. They were a part of his life, almost like a ritual. He would pack his small backpack with notebooks, pencils, a camera, and sometimes a thermos of tea. Each week, he walked through the quiet streets of his town, past the baker who waved at him and the children playing near the fountain, until he reached the harbor. The ship always seemed slightly different every time he arrived. Some weeks, the sunlight hit the hull in a way that made the rust shine like copper. Other weeks, the wind pushed small waves against the dock, creating soft, rhythmic creaks that sounded like the ship was breathing. Daniel liked to think of it that way. The ship had a life of its own, quiet and patient, waiting for someone to notice. He never felt lonely on the ship, On the contrary, he felt calm and focused, as if the world outside the harbor did not exist for those few hours. Over time, he had explored almost every part of the ship. He had climbed the masts, studied the deck, and spent hours inside the captain's cabin. But there were still parts of the ship that puzzled him. Some rooms were locked or blocked by debris. Other areas contained strange objects that seemed out of place for a vessel of its age. Small metal boxes with buttons, strange panels with faded writing, and unusual instruments that he could not identify. Daniel had learned not to force anything open. Instead, he would study these objects from a safe distance and make notes about them. One Saturday, he decided to spend extra time in the control room. He had been drawn to it from the very beginning, ever since he first saw the metallic buttons hidden behind the old panel. Today, he examined the buttons more closely, noticing that some of the labels were in English while others were in a language he did not recognize. There were dials, small screens, and switches, all dusty but still intact. He pressed a few gently. At first, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, one of the lights flickered. His heart raced. Daniel stepped back, wondering if his imagination was playing tricks on him. He had been visiting the ship for months, and now, for the first time, it felt like the ship was responding. The faint hum that followed only increased his curiosity. He made careful sketches of the control panel, noting every button, dial, and screen. He labeled them as best as he could, hoping that one day he would understand what they all meant. Outside the control room, the rest of the ship held its own mysteries. The crew quarters were small but well-constructed, with narrow beds and wooden chests. Daniel found old photographs tucked between the boards of a drawer, black and white images of people in uniforms he did not recognize. Some were smiling, while others looked serious, their eyes focused on something beyond the frame. He tried to imagine their lives, the journeys they had taken, and the stories they had left behind. Daniel also discovered journals hidden in the captain's cabin. He opened them carefully, knowing that the pages could crumble if handled roughly. The handwriting was faded but legible. Many of the entries were ordinary, describing daily routines, meals, and weather conditions at sea. But some entries were strange. One journal mentioned lights moving across the water at night, strange sounds echoing in the hull, and equipment that sometimes worked on its own. The writer seemed uneasy, unsure if what he had experienced was real. Daniel read these entries over and over, feeling a mixture of excitement and unease. As the weeks passed, Daniel's fascination with the ship deepened. He started keeping a detailed log of his own observations, including the weather, tides, and even the position of the sun. He noticed that certain parts of the ship reacted differently depending on the time of day. Sometimes the deck would feel warmer in the afternoon sun, and at other times, he could hear faint vibrations coming from below. It was as if the ship was alive in a subtle way that only he could perceive. Daniel's obsession did not go unnoticed. Friends and neighbors asked about his weekend activities. "Still spending your Saturdays with that old ship?" they would ask, half teasing, half concerned. Daniel always smiled and nodded. He didn't mind their skepticism. He knew that this ship was special. To him, it was not just a piece of metal and wood. It was a story, a mystery, and a companion all in one. One rainy morning, Daniel arrived at the harbor to find the ship glistening with rain. The wooden planks shone darkly, and the puddles reflected the sky in a patchwork of gray. He stepped carefully, the rain soaking through his jacket, and climbed to the deck. The wind howled softly, carrying the smell of salt and wet wood. Inside the control room, the metallic buttons looked different in the dim light. One small light flickered faintly as he approached. He pressed a button, and suddenly a soft hum filled the room, followed by a gentle vibration under his feet. Daniel froze. He had never heard anything like this before. His heart pounded with excitement and fear. He pressed another button gently, and the hum grew slightly louder. The small screens, long dark, flickered with static, and for a moment he thought he saw shapes moving on them. He stepped back, trying to calm himself. Could it be a short circuit? Or had the ship finally reacted to his visits? He didn't know, but he felt a strange connection, as if the ship was acknowledging him. After the rain stopped, Daniel spent the rest of the afternoon exploring. He checked the crew quarters, the deck, and even the cargo hold. In one corner, he found a small chest partially hidden under a pile of ropes. Inside were tools, old equipment, and a few documents that seemed more modern than the rest of the ship. Some of the papers contained diagrams and technical notes that Daniel could not fully understand. He photographed everything and made notes, determined to study them later. Daniel also began to notice small patterns in the ship's behavior. Certain buttons and switches seemed to respond to his touch differently at different times. Sometimes the hum was louder in the morning, and other times it was softer in the afternoon. He felt as if the ship had a rhythm, a secret language that he was slowly beginning to understand. This realization excited him more than anything else. It was as if the ship was alive and waiting for someone patient enough to notice its signals. He started bringing small tools to repair parts of the ship. A broken railing here, a loose plank there, a frayed rope replaced with a new one. It was slow work, but it made him feel like he was helping the ship in some way. Each repair gave him a sense of purpose, as if he was preparing the ship for something greater. He documented each repair carefully in his notebook, adding sketches and measurements. One day, while exploring the cargo hold, Daniel discovered a small compartment hidden behind a stack of crates. Inside was a metal box with a latch. When he opened it, he found what appeared to be old navigation equipment, maps, and a journal. The journal was unlike the others. Its pages were thicker, the writing more precise, and some pages contained diagrams of machinery he did not recognize. He spent hours studying it, fascinated by the level of detail. It was clear that whoever had created this journal had been deeply connected to the ship's purpose. As months passed, Daniel's visits became even more regular. He no longer just explored, he studied. He compared the notes in the journals with his own observations, trying to understand the ship's design, its history, and its secrets. He drew detailed sketches of every room, every deck, and every piece of unusual equipment. The ship had become his world, a place of discovery that gave him meaning and excitement. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the harbor with shades of orange and purple, Daniel sat on the deck, notebook in hand, reflecting on his visits. He realized that the ship had changed him. It had awakened a curiosity he had never felt before, a sense of patience and observation. He also felt a strange bond with it, almost as if the ship recognized his dedication. That night, he had a dream. In it, the ship moved silently across calm waters, lights flickering on the deck, shadows moving in the cabins. He felt a presence guiding him, showing him the ship's story and whispering secrets he could almost understand. He woke up with a start, the image of the ship vivid in his mind, and he knew that he had to return the next Saturday, ready for whatever the ship had to reveal. And so, Daniel continued his routine, visiting the ship every week, documenting, repairing, and observing. The old vessel, forgotten by the world, seemed to respond to his care and attention in subtle ways. Lights flickered, hums resonated, and small vibrations traveled through the decks. Daniel knew that something extraordinary lay hidden within the ship, waiting for him to discover it. Little did he know, his patience and dedication would soon bring a moment that would change everything. A moment when the ship would no longer be silent, when it would finally speak, and when Daniel's life would be forever altered by the secrets it held. Daniel had been visiting the ship for months. Each Saturday he climbed the worn steps, touched the cracked railings, and explored every corner, but something was changing. Over the last few weeks, the subtle signs he had noticed, the faint hum, the flickering lights, the small vibrations, were becoming more frequent. It was as if the ship had grown aware of him, or at least aware of the care he gave it. One morning, he arrived at the harbor just as the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The air was crisp, and the faint smell of salt water filled his lungs. Daniel hurried across the dock, his backpack bouncing lightly on his shoulders. The ship loomed ahead, more majestic than ever, despite its rust and cracks. He paused for a moment, studying it. Today, something felt different. He could sense a quiet energy coming from the hull, subtle but undeniable. He stepped onto the deck, careful with each step as the wood creaked under his weight. The wind ruffled his hair, and the gulls circled above, calling out their shrill cries. As he entered the control room, he noticed that the panel with the buttons and switches seemed almost alive. A faint light pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. Daniel's eyes widened. He had never seen this before. He reached out cautiously and pressed a small, unmarked button. The hum in the room grew louder, a soft vibration running through the floor beneath him. Daniel stepped back, his heart racing. The screens, which had always been dark or filled with static, flickered and came to life. Strange symbols and diagrams appeared, followed by a message in clear English. "Daniel, I have waited for you." He froze. The message seemed to glow on the screen, and for a moment he could not breathe. His mind raced. Could the ship really be communicating with him? He glanced around the control room, half expecting someone to step out from the shadows, but he was alone. The harbor outside was quiet, the gentle waves lapping against the dock. Daniel realized that the message was not from a person. It was from the ship itself, or something inside it. The screen continued to display words forming slowly, carefully. "You have cared for me, you have been patient, now I will show you." Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine. The ship had never done this before. The hum of the machinery grew louder, almost like it was breathing. The lights on the panel flickered in a pattern, and he noticed a small lever that had never moved before. It seemed to invite him to pull it. With trembling hands, Daniel reached for the lever and pulled it gently. Instantly, a low vibration traveled through the deck. The screens changed, showing images. Black and white photos of the ship in its prime, sailing across oceans, crew members standing proudly on deck, and maps with routes that Daniel had never seen before. The ship's history unfolded before his eyes, decades of journeys, storms, and discoveries that had been hidden from the world. He saw a captain giving orders, sailors climbing the masts during storms, and nights when strange lights had appeared in the water, exactly as described in the old journals he had found. The ship seemed to be showing him everything it had experienced, as if it trusted him to understand. Daniel could hardly believe what he was seeing. The vessel he had admired from afar, the one he had thought of as a silent relic, was alive in a way he had never imagined. Images and messages continued to appear on the screens. The ship revealed details of its construction, how it had been designed with advanced systems for navigation, communication, and survival. Daniel realized that the strange buttons and panels he had studied were part of a highly sophisticated network, built decades before technology like this was common. The ship had been an experimental project, abandoned for reasons Daniel could not yet understand. A new message appeared. "I am incomplete without guidance. You are my keeper now." Daniel blinked, unsure of what the ship meant. Keeper? Did it expect him to do something more than just visit? He felt a mix of excitement and responsibility. The ship had chosen him in some way to uncover its secrets, to preserve its story, and perhaps to continue its mission. He spent hours in the control room, studying the screens, pressing buttons, and noting every detail. The ship began to respond to his touch in subtle ways. Certain dials moved automatically when he adjusted others. Small lights flickered in patterns that seemed to indicate communication. It was as if the ship had its own language, one that he was beginning to understand. Every discovery made him more eager to learn. Daniel also noticed something else. The ship seemed to show him things from the past as if it remembered them. One screen displayed a storm at sea. He could see the waves rising, hear the wind howling, and even sense the tension among the crew. Another screen showed a quiet night, the crew sleeping in their cabins, unaware of the ship's hidden systems. Each image was detailed, vivid, and strangely alive. He realized that the ship had stored memories of every voyage, every event, and now it was sharing them with him. As evening approached, Daniel climbed to the deck to get some fresh air. The sky was painted with shades of orange and purple, and the wind carried the scent of the sea. He felt a strange bond with the ship, stronger than ever before. It was no longer just an old vessel. It was a companion, a teacher, and a mystery all at once. He sat on the deck, notebook in hand, and tried to record what he had seen, but he knew that words could not capture everything. Some experiences had to be felt, not written. The ship's messages continued into the night. Daniel discovered a room he had never explored before, a small cabin with a metal table and shelves full of old instruments. On the table lay a journal unlike any he had seen. Its pages were filled with precise notes, diagrams, and codes. The writing seemed to describe the ship's purpose, the experiments it had been part of, and the challenges it had faced. Daniel studied each page carefully, trying to understand the technical details. The ship seemed to guide him, showing only what he was ready to see. Over the following weeks, Daniel's visits became even more intense. He spent every Saturday on the ship, sometimes until sunset, and returned home only when the last light faded from the harbor. He documented everything, sketched diagrams, and photographed the screens and panels. He even began to repair some of the old machinery, guided by the ship's subtle hints. Every repaired mechanism seemed to awaken another part of the vessel, and the messages became clearer. Daniel noticed that the ship's lights would sometimes turn on when he approached certain areas. A small motor would hum softly as if in recognition of his presence. Even the air felt different inside the cabins, warmer and more alive than the rest of the ship. He realized that this was no ordinary vessel. It had a consciousness, and it recognized him as someone who cared. The thought filled him with awe. One rainy afternoon, Daniel arrived at the harbor to find the ship glistening under the gray sky. He climbed aboard, and the hum of the ship was louder than ever. The screens lit up automatically, displaying a new message. "You have seen the past. Now you must help me prepare for the future." Daniel's heart raced. He did not yet understand what the ship meant by the future, but he knew it had plans that involved him. That day, he explored a section of the ship he had avoided before, a storage room filled with crates and metal containers. Inside, he found equipment that looked modern, almost like it had been built yesterday. He touched a small panel, and the screen above it flickered to life, showing diagrams and instructions. It was clear that the ship had been designed for more than simple voyages. It had a mission, one that had been paused decades ago. Daniel felt a deep sense of responsibility. He was no longer just an observer, he was a participant. As the weeks turned into months, Daniel began to feel a rhythm with the ship. He learned which buttons to press, which levers to pull, and which dials to adjust to see specific information. The ship began to trust him, revealing more of its story with each visit. He saw logs of past voyages, diagrams of hidden compartments, and recordings of crew interactions. It was as if the ship had stored its entire life, waiting for someone patient enough to uncover it. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned golden, Daniel sat on the deck, reflecting on everything he had learned. The ship had changed his life. It had taught him patience, curiosity, and the joy of discovery. He felt a bond that went beyond mere fascination. It was a partnership, a connection between human and machine, past and present. And then, without warning, the ship displayed a message that made Daniel's breath catch. "You are ready. Come to the control room." He stood up, heart pounding, and hurried inside. The screens flickered with diagrams, showing a new part of the ship he had never explored. It seemed the ship was preparing him for something important, something that would reveal its true purpose. Daniel realized that his journey was far from over. The ship had awakened, and he had become its keeper, its observer, and perhaps its guide. The months of visits, the careful notes, and the patient exploration had led to this moment. He did not know what awaited him, but he knew one thing for certain. The ship had chosen him for a reason, and he would not let its story remain hidden any longer. For the first time, Daniel understood that the ship was not just a relic of the past. It was a bridge between history and the present, a keeper of secrets, and now, a companion that trusted him. He felt a mixture of awe, excitement, and determination. The ship had waited decades for someone like him, and he would not disappoint it. That night, as Daniel left the harbor, he looked back at the ship. Its lights glowed softly in the darkness, and the hum resonated in his chest like a heartbeat. He smiled, knowing that their journey together was only beginning, and that the secrets of the ship, its past, and its future were waiting to be discovered. From the moment the ship first sent him a message, Daniel felt as if his life had changed forever. Every Saturday, he had returned to the harbor with excitement, ready to explore, ready to learn, ready to understand. But now, the ship seemed to have opened a door into something far bigger than he had ever imagined. It had chosen him to uncover its story, its purpose, and perhaps even to guide its next steps. That morning, Daniel arrived at the harbor earlier than usual. The water was calm, reflecting the pale sunlight in a soft shimmer. The air smelled of salt and wet wood, the wind carrying a gentle rhythm as if the harbor itself was holding its breath. The ship waited silently, its rusted hull and cracked deck unassuming to anyone who didn't know its secret, but to Daniel, it seemed to glow with anticipation. He stepped onto the deck and felt the familiar vibrations hum beneath his feet. The panels in the control room were already lit, the screens displaying a new message. "Today, you will see everything. Are you ready?" Daniel hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding. He had been ready for months, but the gravity of the ship's words made him pause. Then he nodded to himself. He had been chosen, and he would not turn away now. Inside the control room, the screens changed, showing a sequence of images and diagrams that Daniel had never seen before. Maps appeared, charting long-lost routes across oceans. Photographs of the crew lined the walls of the virtual display, smiling, serious, determined. Notes and technical diagrams appeared, explaining the ship's systems in ways that were both complex and astonishingly detailed. Daniel realized the ship had been far ahead of its time, a masterpiece of engineering that had been abandoned for reasons now slowly becoming clear. The ship's voice, or rather its messages, guided him through each system. It explained the navigation mechanisms, how the engine compartments had been built to withstand extreme weather, and how the hidden communication devices had allowed it to send signals across vast distances. Daniel was amazed. The vessel was no ordinary ship. It was a floating archive of knowledge, history, and technology preserved carefully within its hull. As he explored the control room, the screens shifted to more personal stories. Daniel saw the crew during their daily routines, preparing meals, climbing masts during storms, and recording logs in the captain's cabin. He felt a profound connection to these people, long gone, whose lives had revolved around this very ship. One screen showed a stormy night at sea. Daniel could almost feel the wind and hear the waves crashing against the deck. The ship had captured these moments, preserving them in vivid detail for him to witness. Then a message appeared that made Daniel pause. "I am incomplete without your guidance. Together we can complete my purpose." He stared at the words, unsure what the ship meant by purpose. He knew it had been abandoned decades ago, its missions unfinished. Perhaps it was asking him to help finish what had been started, to preserve its story, and to share its knowledge with the world. He spent hours in the control room that day, following the ship's guidance. It led him to compartments he had never noticed before, each containing instruments, maps, and journals that revealed more about the ship's past missions. Some documents described explorations of distant coasts and islands that had been forgotten over time. Others detailed scientific observations, measurements of currents, winds, and the stars. Daniel realized that the ship had been a pioneer in ways that history had never recorded. The ship also revealed why it had been abandoned. A series of messages described technical failures that had seemed mysterious at the time. Certain systems had malfunctioned unpredictably, forcing the crew to dock the ship permanently. Daniel understood now that the ship had been far ahead of its time, but no one had been ready for its innovations. And yet, it had survived, preserved in silence, waiting for someone patient and curious enough to understand. In the weeks that followed, Daniel became completely absorbed. Every visit brought new discoveries. He repaired old machinery guided by the ship, tested systems that had been dormant for decades, and recorded every observation in meticulous detail. The ship responded to his care in subtle ways. Lights flickered in patterns, screens activated automatically, and small hums traveled through the deck as if the vessel were alive and aware. Daniel felt a deep sense of responsibility. He was not just exploring, he was preserving history. One afternoon, while studying a set of old journals, Daniel discovered a collection of encrypted messages that the ship had stored. They seemed like simple codes at first, but with careful observation, he began to recognize patterns. The ship had preserved communications from past missions, messages between the crew and distant stations, and even coordinates for locations that had been forgotten over time. Each discovery was like unlocking a secret, a small piece of a larger story that had waited decades to be revealed. The ship guided him patiently, showing only what he could understand and handle. Daniel began to see it as more than just a vessel. It was a teacher, sharing knowledge at a pace that matched his curiosity and care. Some days he would spend the entire afternoon inside the control room, following the ship's instructions, testing buttons, pulling levers, and watching screens that displayed images from the past. He marveled at the precision and intelligence embedded in the ship's systems. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with deep oranges and purples, Daniel climbed to the deck to reflect. The harbor was quiet, the water shimmering in the fading light. He realized that his life had changed completely. Before he had discovered the ship, he had lived a quiet, ordinary life. Now every week he was part of something extraordinary, a story that combined history, technology, and human curiosity. The next Saturday, the ship displayed something entirely new. Screens lit up to show plans, diagrams, and instructions for restoring certain systems. It seemed to be asking Daniel to complete tasks that the crew had never finished. He carefully followed the steps, guided by the ship's messages, repairing engines, calibrating instruments, and adjusting systems that had been dormant for decades. The ship responded immediately to his actions, lights glowing steadily, hums growing stronger, as if it recognized each successful repair. Daniel realized that he was becoming part of the ship's story. He was no longer an observer, he was a participant, a collaborator in completing its purpose. The sense of awe he felt was overwhelming. The ship had survived time, neglect, and abandonment, but it had chosen him to bring its story to life. He felt an unspoken bond with the vessel, a trust that had grown through months of careful visits and patient observation. As the weeks turned into months, Daniel began documenting everything with greater precision. He wrote detailed notes, sketched diagrams, and photographed instruments and screens. He also began preparing a historical record, combining the ship's past voyages, the crew's stories, and the technical innovations he was uncovering. He wanted to preserve not only the ship, but the knowledge it contained for future generations. One night, as he left the harbor, the ship's lights glowed softly in the darkness, and a final message appeared on the screen. "You have prepared me. Now share our story with the world." Daniel stood for a moment, staring at the glowing panels. He understood what he had to do. The ship had revealed its secrets, guided him to restore its systems, and now trusted him to share its history. He felt a mixture of pride, responsibility, and wonder. Daniel dedicated the following months to preparing a complete record of the ship. He combined photographs, sketches, journals, and technical notes into a single, cohesive story. He reached out to historians, engineers, and maritime experts, sharing his findings. The response was immediate. Experts were amazed by the ship's design, technology, and the depth of its preserved knowledge. Daniel realized that he had uncovered not just a vessel, but a historical treasure that had been waiting decades for someone patient enough to discover it. The ship, once silent and forgotten, had become a bridge between the past and the present. Through Daniel's dedication, its stories, innovations, and history were now shared with the world. Exhibitions were held, articles were written, and the ship itself became a symbol of patience, curiosity, and discovery. Daniel often returned to the harbor, climbing the deck to sit quietly and reflect. He still felt the hum beneath his feet, the subtle vibrations that reminded him the ship was alive in its own way, aware and grateful. The journey had changed Daniel too. He had learned the value of patience, observation, and dedication. He had experienced the joy of discovery, the thrill of uncovering secrets, and the profound connection between human curiosity and history. The ship had not only shared its story, but had transformed his life. As he stood on the deck one last time, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Daniel realized that some things were meant to be preserved, some secrets were meant to wait, and some bonds were meant to last beyond time. The ship had chosen him, guided him, and trusted him. In return, he had shared its story with the world, completing a journey that had begun with a simple visit on a quiet Saturday morning. And though the ship would remain at the harbor, quiet and patient, its story was alive, carried in the minds and hearts of those who learned of it, a testament to the extraordinary hidden in the ordinary and to the power of curiosity and care.